It was upon an evening of raw and gusty wind that I found myself once more in Baker Street, watching the pale flicker of our fire gather itself into a steady glow, while Holmes, with his usual languor, stretched at full length upon the settee. The rain had abated to a thin, persistent drizzle that silvered the window panes and left the road below pitted with black pools of reflected gaslight. I had hardly cast my hat to the peg when Mrs. Hudson brought in the late post, 2 letters and a telegram, the latter creased as if delivered in haste. Holmes did not move, but one long hand extended like a fishing rod for the blue envelope. He tore it with the neatness of a surgeon and, with a half-closed eye, read the brief message. A faint sound, not unlike a suppressed laugh, escaped him. "From Lestrade, if I mistake not," said I, for the man's cramped, urgent style was almost visible in the taut corners of Holmes's mouth. "You are correct, Watson. It seems our friend at the Yard is driven from the comforts of inland reason to the boggy borders of superstition." He passed me the flimsy. "You will observe that the great British public and some small portion of its constabulary are once again haunted by the inexplicable." The telegram ran thus: "Blackwood Cemetery, urgency. Groundsman dead. Mausoleum lit from within, though sealed. Villagers swear phantom walking. Press sniffing. Please come at once. Lestrade." "Blackwood Cemetery," I repeated. "The name puts one in the mood for shudders. Where is it?" "Off the Hampstead Road, a private burying ground long since absorbed by tawny bricks and new villas. Old elms, older prejudice. Your medical brethren still maintain leases to vaults there. Put on your stout boots, Watson. The ground will be treacherous." We were not long in descending to a hansom, Holmes pausing only to clap his violin case shut and pocket a pair of slender forceps and his lens. He carried also his stout ash cane, which, in certain moods, he preferred to the heavier malacca. As we drove, the wet air struck our faces like a handkerchief steeped in cold water. The streets thinned, shop fronts gave way to iron railings and hedgerows that dripped with patient sorrow. Presently, the bell of a parish church, dull and muffled, tolled the half-hour. "Phantoms," Holmes murmured. "If there is a ghost in this city, Watson, it is the ghost of an unexamined fact." "You think, then, that Lestrade has been frightened into poetry?" "I think that Lestrade has been frightened into publicity, which is worse. A reporter's appetite can turn a lantern into a miracle." We alighted at a wrought-iron gate whose spikes were wet-pointed like a line of miniature lances. Beyond stretched a slope of ground, uneven as an old quilt, stitched with graves and paths that dipped into hollows where the fog lay like milk. A single constable held the gate. His cheeks were chapped, and his mustache had curled damply into reluctant hooks. "Inspector's up yonder, sir," he said, touching his helmet. "By the Mulgrave vault. Keep to the cinders, if you please. Paths are slippery." A line of lanterns, wavering like will-o'-the-wisps, led us through the gloom. The stone angels and urns watched us pass with their blind patience. Ivy, black with rain, stuck to the masonry like old writing. We came at last upon a cluster of figures beneath a yew, whose branches combed the mist and dripped steadily upon the living and the dead alike. Lestrade stood with his collar up, his breath a pale ghost of its own. "Mr. Holmes, Doctor," he said, in that dry little voice of his, "I wish to heaven I could say I was glad to see you. It is a damned awkward business." He motioned us to a square, Romanesque mausoleum cut from dark stone, the doorway sealed by a single slab fitted with an iron lock plate. Through a round aperture high upon the facade, no larger than a man's hand, and intended, I imagine, for ventilation, there trembled the unmistakable warm flutter of lamplight. "You have men within?" I asked. Lestrade shook his head. No one has entered, Doctor. The lock's unbroken and the slab unmoved. But for the past hour and more, the caretaker swears he has twice seen a light within. And once... Lestrade hesitated, his lean face hardening as if against his own credulity. Once a figure, pale as candle wax, pacing back and forth, and then gone. There's no other entrance. Windows are false. Family, Mulgrave. Wealthy, high-strung, and if the papers hear of phantoms, litigious. To make matters worse, our groundsman, old Jacob Snipe, lies dead yonder, at the foot of the yew. He led us a few paces. A shape under a tarpaulin rose like a low hill in the grass. At Lestrade's nod, the constable lifted the edge, and the light fell upon a thin, leathery face framed by clotted gray hair. The eyes were mercifully closed. A black smear marred the right temple. Found him just before 9, Lestrade said. No sign of a weapon. No footprints worth the name. The place is a sponge. He had his keys, though not the key to the Mulgrave vault. That is retained by the family. Dr. Willis was fetched from the parish. Apoplexy aggravated by shock, says he. I say someone struck him. Holmes had gone down upon one knee. His lens flashed as it caught the lantern's tremulous light. With no air of haste, but of an almost feline readiness, he examined the edge of the tarpaulin, the dead man's coat sleeves, and the soaked turf all about. Observe, Watson, he said softly. The right cuff is smeared with, what would you call it? I knelt. Soot, I ventured. From a lamp, perhaps. Partly. Partly it is the residue of spent matches. See the phosphorus crust along the seam. Curious in such quantity, unless the man had reason to strike several in a wind. And here, he pointed to the ground just beyond the dead man's boots. Note, the faint linear impressions, regular as the threads of a worn corduroy. Wheel marks? Said Lestrade. Not at that width, Inspector. More like the channels of a narrow ladder pressed at an angle, but with a curious cross-hatching. We shall see. Holmes rose and turned his attention to the mausoleum. The iron lock plate showed a dull bloom of rust. Water had run, leaving brown tears beneath it. You say the family retains the key. The Honorable Miss Lydia Mulgrave has it, Lestrade replied. Daughter of the late Lord Mulgrave, interred within. She lives in a house adjoining the cemetery. I have sent for her. She is nervous. Holmes's fingers, long and pale, traced the edges of the stone slab. He pressed at one corner, then another. He sniffed the iron. Oil, he murmured. Not from the rain. A light machine oil, recently applied and sparingly. It has the faint odor of, what is the vulgar term, Watson? Goose grease? I suggested, thinking of old domestic remedies. Hardly domestic, my dear fellow. Industrial. A blend used in certain workshop lamps. And here, above, give me your shoulder. He stepped lightly upon my offered support and peered into the round aperture. For a heartbeat, the moving glow within painted his face with a ghastly animation, as if the light itself breathed. Holmes sniffed again, withdrew, and dropped cat-like to the ground. A paraffin lamp, trimmed poorly, with a wick half drowned. But it is the draught that surprises me. The draught? Said Lestrade. From within outward. The breath of a sleeping creature will fill a room. The breath of a hidden passage will empty it. Before Lestrade could frame an objection, a cry came from the path. A lady, slender and in mourning black, hurried towards us under the escort of a constable with his lantern held high. Her veil was lifted and her face white as though carved in marble. She bore herself with an attempt at composure that trembled at the edges. I am Miss Mulgrave, she said. with a little bow that wavered like a candle flame. "Inspector, gentlemen, this terrible business. Jacob was a faithful servant. And the vault?" Her eyes, rising to the dim glow at the aperture, widened with involuntary dread. Holmes's manner, when confronted with grief, could possess an unexpected gentleness. "You have the key, Miss Mulgrave?" Yes, of course." She fumbled in her reticule and produced a long iron key whose wards were rimed with damp. "But I must beg you. My father, he was interred with certain family papers. My brother died at sea. I am alone. If there is sacrilege, if any wretch has dared—" "No wretch, Miss Mulgrave," Holmes said, his voice very even. "Only a fact, and we shall arrive at it. You will not be asked to enter." He turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, if you will permit me, we shall open the vault. But first, a single circuit about the base with your lantern. Slowly, please." We obeyed him. The grass at the threshold had been scraped into muddy crescents by many boots, but at the rear and along the sides, the ground was less disturbed. Holmes stooped twice to pluck at something scarcely visible. Once, a short filament like a horsehair, wet and taut upon the stone. Again, a sliver of wax that had lodged in the seam, oddly flattened, as though compressed by a surface not of stone, but of fabric. When we had completed the circuit, Holmes nodded to Miss Mulgrave, who, with a visible effort, placed the key in the lock. The iron groaned, the slab shuddered, and, assisted by 2 constables, was drawn outward upon its runners. A breath of bitter, old air issued forth, and the lamplight within, which had seemed so certain, dwindled and guttered as if shamed by the night. Lestrade held his lantern high and stepped to the threshold. I peered over his shoulder. The interior of the vault presented a narrow passage flanked by 3 resting places of stone. Upon the central bier lay a coffin of dark wood, the plate catching a mere glint of yellow. At its foot, on the flagstones, stood a paraffin lamp with its chimney smoked black. No other movement, no other sound, only the patient drip of a water somewhere beyond, counting the seconds like a metronome. Holmes did not immediately enter. He stood instead just inside the doorway, head tilted, nostrils delicately flaring, as if to the faintest perfume. He looked not at the lamp nor the coffin, but at the floor, where thin trails of moisture had gathered, and then, so it seemed to my less practiced eye, refused the course gravity had offered them. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious." "Come, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade called from within, his shadow jagged against the walls. "If there is your phantom, we shall find him in good English wood and brass." Holmes stepped forward at last, and I, with a swallow, followed. Behind us, Miss Mulgrave stood like a figure arrested in marble, her hands clenched upon the damp air, while outside the yew gave another patient shiver and let fall a succession of cold, heavy drops, like the slow beginning of a clock that would count out a very particular night. The vault smelled of damp stone and old iron, the kind of air that had been long confined and had grown musty with its own silence. My lantern beam quivered against the walls, showing shelves and niches, but nothing alive save the flame itself. Lestrade, stiff with resolve, advanced toward the coffin, his boots ringing hollow upon the flagstones. Holmes followed, but with a gait so quiet and precise that one might have thought he feared to disturb the very molecules of the air. I confess that my own heart beat somewhat louder than propriety allowed, for the sight of the dim lamp left burning in this tomb roused an instinctive chill not altogether explained by science. Holmes crouched near the lamp, studying it with a gaze as fixed as though it were some cryptic scripture. His fingers hovered above the chimney without touching, then traced the sooty streak upon the stone beside it. He leaned forward and inhaled, his sharp nose twitching like a hound's. "There is an admixture here," he murmured. "Kerosene mingled with paraffin. A poor choice if one wishes a clean flame. Whoever trimmed this wick is no stranger to haste. Note how it gutters. Such carelessness is eloquent." Lestrade, with an air of impatience, tapped the coffin's brass plate. "Here lies Lord Mulgrave. What we must determine is whether he still lies here undisturbed." Holmes shot him a glance, quick as a rapier thrust. To break a coffin lid without due authority would be an act more sensational than any phantom tale. We must not trespass upon the sanctities of the dead without necessity. Let us first assure ourselves of the living. He moved toward the corner, where a faint trickle of water threaded across the floor. Bending low, he traced the path of the moisture with his lens. "See here, Watson," he beckoned. I knelt, and he indicated how the water did not run directly to the drain, but veered as if drawn by some gradient, unnatural and straight. "This floor conceals a fall toward a point yonder, a cavity beneath, perhaps, or a passage." His voice had dropped to that tone of excitement in which his deductions crystallized into certainty. At that instant, the lamp guttered violently, and the flame flared high, throwing grotesque shadows upon the stone. Miss Mulgrave, who had remained outside, gave a muffled cry, clutching at the iron gate. Lestrade swore under his breath. Holmes alone seemed unaffected, his face lit in a ghastly relief that made his hawk-like features more striking than ever. He rose and tapped the flagstone with his cane. The hollow resonance confirmed his suspicion. "We have a false floor, but let us not be premature. Inspector, have 2 of your men guard the approaches. No one must leave these grounds until dawn." Lestrade obeyed, though with a visible struggle between superstition and duty. He turned to Miss Mulgrave with awkward sympathy. "Madam, it would be best if you returned to your house until we have concluded our search." But she shook her head, pale and resolute. "I cannot leave while my father's rest is profaned. I shall remain." Her words carried more steel than her fragile appearance suggested. Holmes gave her a bow that was almost courtly, then signaled me to hold my lantern steady. With measured effort, he pressed at the flagged surface, seeking the seam. At length, a slab shifted by a hair's breadth, disclosing the faint draft he had earlier noted. The air that escaped was colder still, carrying with it a whisper of earth long sealed. "A passage, as I surmised," Holmes declared softly. "Someone has contrived an entry that neither Lestrade's constables nor the caretaker could have guessed. It is here that your phantom has walked, not through any wall of autumn stone." Lestrade knelt beside him. But how in heaven's name did they raise it without tools? Holmes tapped the edge with his cane. "Observe the grooves, worn smooth. A lever fitted neatly here would suffice. Our intruder has prepared his theater well." He straightened and fixed Lestrade with a gaze both sharp and sardonic. "You will see now, Inspector, why Jacob Snipes' death cannot be laid to apoplexy." The man stumbled too near the truth. A silence fell, broken only by the drip from the ceiling. I could see the struggle upon Lestrade's face as reason battled with unease. He drew himself up with an effort. "Very well, Mr. Holmes. We shall lift it." Holmes's hand restrained him. "Not yet. Consider, Inspector. If the passage serves for ingress, then its occupant may not yet be far. To open hastily is to warn him. Better we take the air about us, note every footprint, every fleck of clay upon the steps. Then we descend prepared, not blundering into his arms." It was a sensible plan, and Lestrade, though impatient, consented. Holmes knelt once more by the coffin and touched the thin film of wax he had found earlier. Holding it to the lantern, he showed how the surface bore faint impressions as though pressed against cloth woven fine. A candle stub, crushed within a pocket. Our intruder is careless of such trifles. Yet trifles, Watson, are the links in the chain of proof. Miss Mulgrave, still at the threshold, spoke tremulously. Then it was no phantom, only some miscreant with a lamp and a key to the earth. Holmes regarded her steadily. I do not deal in phantoms, madam. The human imagination is a more potent ghost than any that treads the graveyard. Your groundsman saw what fear suggested, but beneath the suggestion lies a very solid villain. I confess I felt both relief and renewed dread. Relief that some spectral horror was dismissed. Dread at the thought of a living hand moving in these tunnels with purpose unknown. Holmes signaled to the constables to ready their lanterns. We shall return with crowbars and rope. Meanwhile, Inspector, seal this entrance and station a guard. Our quarry is caged, though we must learn whether he is rat or fox. The mausoleum was closed once more, the slab pressed back, the lock secured. Outside, the drizzle had thickened, and the lamps glimmered through veils of mist. Holmes stood a moment, gazing at the yew whose dark branches leaned above the grave of Jacob Snipe. His profile, sharp against the lantern glow, was grim and intent. We have drawn back, but the first veil, he said. The next will not yield so easily. And with that, we turned toward Miss Mulgrave's house, her figure fragile between us, the night about us heavy with the weight of secrets yet unspoken, and the whisper of the hidden passage tugging at our very thoughts. Miss Mulgrave's residence stood just beyond the cemetery wall, a modest house of somber brick with narrow windows that glowed faintly as we approached. The rain clung in threads to the ivy, and the wind groaned along the eaves as though the building itself were reluctant to welcome us. Within, however, we found a sitting room prepared for warmth, the hearth burning low and a silver tray of untouched tea upon the table. The lady, visibly shaken, drew off her gloves and pressed them in her lap, while Holmes, without waiting for invitation, walked the perimeter of the room with quick, hawk-like glances, observing every object. I fear I am a poor hostess, Miss Mulgrave said faintly. Jacob was devoted to my family for decades. To lose him so brutally, on such ground— Her voice caught, and she raised her kerchief, though her eyes never left Holmes, as if seeking an assurance that only he could give. Holmes inclined his head, his manner grave yet brisk. Your composure is admirable, Miss Mulgrave, though the circumstances are enough to unseat anyone. We must, however, ask you several questions, for each detail may prove vital. You alone possess the key to the Mulgrave vault? Yes. It has remained in my keeping since my father's interment last year. I keep it always upon my person. She indicated her reticule with a tremor of pride. No other hand has touched it. Yet someone has contrived a passage from beneath, Holmes murmured, half to himself. He turned sharply. Who else has knowledge of your family's arrangements? Servants, perhaps, or kin? I have no kin remaining. My brother was lost with the Hesperus off Madeira. My mother departed this life many years past. Only Jacob remained of those who served us long. The present staff is small. A maid-of-all-work, Sarah, a gardener, though he comes but twice a week, and a young footman engaged through an agency only 3 months ago. None of them have cause to concern themselves with the vault. Holmes had stopped before a portrait upon the wall, a man of middle years in naval uniform, stern-eyed and broad-shouldered, the painted background stormy as if to foretell his fate. "Your brother?" he asked. She inclined her head. "Yes, Gerald Mulgrave. He sought fortune at sea but never returned. His effects were meager, a few papers, some correspondence. I have kept them in the bureau yonder." Holmes approached the bureau but did not open it, merely ran a finger along its edge. "You will permit me to examine them later. For the moment, I beg you to recall. Has anyone of late pressed you about these papers, or about your family's resting place?" Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "There was—" She hesitated, then clasped her hands more tightly. "A gentleman called not 3 weeks past, professing to be an antiquarian interested in local histories. He asked many questions regarding the Mulgrave lineage, and whether any relics were buried with my father. I dismissed him, thinking his curiosity impertinent. But he seemed learned, even courteous, though there was a keenness in his manner I disliked." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A description, if you please." "He was tall, with hair already graying at the temples, though he could not have been past 40. His speech was refined, but his eyes very sharp, restless, never still. He gave his name as Mr. Armitage." Lestrade, who had been silent till now, exclaimed, "Armitage! We have had whisper of a fellow by that name, mixed with dealers in illicit antiquities. I shall send word at once." He made for the writing desk, but Holmes checked him with a lifted hand. "Patience, Inspector. To rouse our quarry too soon is to scatter him. We must first understand what he seeks. If he imagines some treasure interred with Lord Mulgrave, then he will not abandon the passage so carefully contrived. He will return, and when he does, we shall be ready." Miss Mulgrave, pale and weary, whispered, "Then I am in danger?" Holmes regarded her with unexpected gentleness. "No more danger than lies in knowledge kept too long in darkness. Trust that we shall bring this matter to light. For now you must rest. Tomorrow will demand much of your strength." She allowed Sarah, the maid, to conduct her upstairs. Holmes stood silent until her footsteps faded, then moved to the hearth where the flame licked low. He took up the poker, stirred the coals thoughtfully, and said in a tone more to himself than to us, "The phantom at Blackwood Cemetery is no mere melodrama for the penny press. There is purpose, and in purpose lies the clue. Consider, Watson, the oil upon the lock, the careless wick, the candle stub. Each points not to spectral visitations, but to the crude necessities of a man who must see his way underground." Lestrade seated himself heavily. "You think Armitage killed the groundsman?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "I think Jacob Snipe saw more than he was meant to. Whether struck down by Armitage's hand or another, we shall discover. Yet I doubt such a man would soil his own fingers when hirelings abound." The wind battered at the casement then, and a loose shutter clattered like a pistol shot. I confess I started, for the night had laid its tension upon every nerve. Holmes smiled faintly, the expression gone in a breath, and drew his violin case from beside the door where he had set it earlier. Without opening it, he tapped it lightly as though reminding himself of some private resolve. "We return at dawn, Watson," he said. "The slab shall be raised, the passage searched. But tonight we gather impressions. Lestrade, instruct your men to watch the gate in pairs, silently, lanterns hooded. Our quarry may seek another entrance." When at last we retired, I found little rest. My mind replayed the flicker of that lamp inside the tomb, the hollow resonance beneath the coffin, and the strange composure of Miss Mulgrave. Half fear, half defiance. Toward morning, when the rain softened and the first pallor touched the east, Holmes roused me with his customary abruptness. "Come, Watson. The night has played its game. Now it is for us to make the next move. Bring your revolver. Superstition must yield to steel when the earth opens its throat to secrets." And so, weary yet quickened by purpose, we set forth again toward Blackwood Cemetery, the fog thinning like a veil torn by invisible hands, and the promise of revelation lying beneath the stones that guarded the dead. The dawn was chill and colorless, the sky drawn in a pallid gray that seemed reluctant to release the sun. A thin fog clung still to the hollows, though the higher ground showed damp grass sparkling faintly with dew. Holmes and I, wrapped in our heavy coats, made our way back toward Blackwood Cemetery in the company of Lestrade and 2 constables who bore crowbars and rope. The silence of that early hour, broken only by the crunch of our boots upon the cinder path, lent the whole proceeding a solemnity that no words could pierce. Miss Mulgrave had not appeared, though she had sent down a note by her maid, written in a neat but tremulous hand, urging us to be careful of her father's resting place and begging to be informed of all we discovered. Holmes pocketed it without comment, but I saw his eyes flicker with a moment's sympathy before the hard edge of his concentration resumed. The mausoleum stood much as we had left it, its stone facade glistening damp and its iron fittings dark with rust. Yet the constable posted through the night swore that no disturbance had occurred. No figure had approached, nor any light flickered within, since the slab had been resealed. Holmes regarded him keenly, then bent to examine the earth about the threshold. He crouched in silence for several minutes, his fingers brushing the soil with that delicate precision of touch which seemed to communicate to him impressions invisible to the rest of us. "Note, Watson," he said at length, "how the surface bears no fresh indentation. The rain would have betrayed the faintest intrusion. Our quarry has not ventured back in the small hours. He believes his secret safe." He tapped his cane against the slab. "Let us undeceive him." With the combined effort of the constables and Lestrade, the heavy stone was drawn outward upon its runners. A cold draught rushed up from within, extinguishing one of the lanterns, and the odor of damp earth and mildew met us once more. Holmes directed that the ropes be tied securely to the rings of the slab, so it might be hauled aside with less noise should haste later be required. Then, stooping, he gestured for one of the constables to lower his lantern into the aperture. The flagstones beneath were slick with moisture, but clearly visible now was the outline of a rectangular slab slightly raised above its fellows. Holmes produced a piece of chalk from his pocket and marked the positions where levers might best be applied. "Now, Inspector, gently. If we raise too suddenly, we may betray ourselves." The crowbars were set in place, and with a low groan of protest, the stone lifted, revealing a narrow flight of steps descending steeply into darkness. A fetid air rose like the exhalation of some subterranean beast. Lestrade muttered a curse, but Holmes, lantern in hand, descended without hesitation, his tall figure vanishing into the gloom. I followed close, revolver ready, while the others brought up the rear. The passage was narrow and lined with brickwork that had grown green with moisture. Our footsteps rang hollow, and the sound of dripping water echoed from unseen depths. The stair ended in a low corridor, which stretched away beneath the cemetery toward an uncertain distance. At intervals, small wooden props supported the roof, and on the ground lay scraps of wax and the burned-out heads of matches. Holmes bent swiftly, collecting 2 or 3 between finger and thumb. "Our phantom is nothing if not careless," he observed. "See the brand. Common wax tapers sold by the dozen. He has left us a trail more plain than breadcrumbs." We moved on, the lanterns casting long, trembling shadows upon the walls. Presently the corridor widened into a chamber, roughly hewn and unfinished, with a rude bench of stone set against one wall. Upon it lay a coil of rope, a spade, and a tin of lamp oil, half empty. The sight of those implements, so practical and ordinary, in such a place, struck a chill into me greater than any phantom light could have done. Holmes examined them with quick eyes. Tools for excavation. He intends to dig, perhaps already has done so. But for what purpose? His gaze shifted toward a section of wall where the bricks bore fresh scratches, as though recently disturbed. He pressed his ear to the surface, then stepped back, his expression tightening. Behind this partition lies another vault, he declared. It would appear our Mr. Armitage has conceived a plan to enter it by stealth, rather than petition the family who owns it. Let us see whose ancestors lie beyond. Lestrade made a note, muttering that he would consult the registry of plots. But Holmes was not finished. He swept his lantern across the floor and froze suddenly. Here, Watson. What do you see? I bent low and discerned in the dust the impression of a boot sole, smaller than the constable's, narrower, with a peculiar notch at the heel. Beside it, half overlapping, was another print, lighter, delicate, the unmistakable outline of a woman's shoe. A woman! I exclaimed. She has been down here. Holmes's eyes glittered. Indeed, and recently, for the edges are sharp and not blurred by moisture. A woman and a man, moving together. Our tale grows more complex. At that moment a sound reached us. A faint clink of metal against stone, distant yet distinct. Instinctively, every man stiffened. Holmes raised his hand for silence, extinguished his lantern with a swift motion, and we were plunged into darkness, broken only by the dim glow of Lestrade's hooded lamp. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a soft scraping as of spade against mortar. Holmes's whisper was scarcely audible. He is at work even now. Back against the wall, gentlemen. We shall observe before we act. The game begins. And so we stood in breathless stillness, hidden in the shadows of that underground chamber, while the unseen laborer pursued his task ahead. The faint ring of metal, the shuffle of boots, the mutter of an indistinct voice, all drifted toward us through the oppressive dark. I felt the hairs rise upon my neck. Holmes beside me was rigid, every nerve braced for the moment when the trap must spring. The muffled scrape grew clearer as we waited in the gloom, each man straining to catch the direction of the sound. Holmes crouched low, one hand extended in warning, his head tilted to mark the faintest vibration in the air. The voice came again, more distinct now, a muttered phrase in tones that were not English. It sounded guttural, harsh, the syllables chopped as though spoken with impatience. Then the ring of iron against brick resounded, followed by a pause and the faint hiss of a lantern being trimmed. A glow, yellow and uncertain, touched the curve of the corridor ahead. Holmes moved noiselessly forward, and we followed, placing each step with the care of men upon a frozen lake. The chamber widened suddenly, and there, before a section of wall whose bricks had already been pried loose, crouched a tall figure in a dark coat. He had thrown off his hat, and his hair, thick and streaked with gray, clung damp to his temples. At his feet a spade rested, and in his hand he held a short crowbar with which he worked at the mortar. Beside him, clutching a lantern and watching nervously, stood a woman muffled in a long cloak. The light showed her features in fitful glimpses, pale, refined, with eyes that darted ceaselessly toward the shadows. Holmes raised a finger to his lips and waited until the man's crowbar gave a particularly loud crack. Then he stepped forward into the ring of light. "Good morning, Mr. Armitage," he said, his voice calm and cutting. "I trust you find the air agreeable in your present occupation." The effect was electric. The man started back with a cry, dropping the crowbar, while the woman's lantern shook so violently that the flame nearly went out. Lestrade and the constables rushed in with a shout, hemming the pair in on either side. For an instant the man's hand darted toward his coat, as though to draw a weapon. But Holmes's cane was already pressed firmly against his wrist, and the gesture died stillborn. "Stand fast," Lestrade commanded. "You are taken at last, Armitage. And the lady, who is she?" The woman shrank back, pulling her cloak about her face. "You cannot know. Leave me be," she whispered. But the tremor in her voice betrayed both fear and familiarity. Holmes's eyes, narrowed, regarded her with a keen light. "On the contrary, madam," he said quietly, "we know a good deal already. A woman's shoe print betrayed your presence here last night. And if I mistake not, those features, though half concealed, are not wholly unknown to Miss Lydia Mulgrave." The woman gave a strangled cry, and the cloak fell aside, revealing the unmistakable countenance of the lady we had left in her house but a few hours earlier. Yet it was not Miss Mulgrave herself, but her image so strikingly similar that for a moment I could scarcely credit my eyes. The resemblance was extraordinary. The same delicate brow, the same arch of the lips, though harder, more willful. "My sister," came a voice from the passage behind us. We turned to see Miss Lydia herself, pale as marble, supported by her maid. She had followed despite her protestations of fatigue, unable, it seemed, to resist the pull of her family secret. She gazed at the cloaked woman with mingled grief and reproach. "Eleanor, you should never have come back." The resemblance was explained, yet the revelation deepened rather than solved the mystery. The cloaked woman, Eleanor, raised her chin defiantly. "What choice had I? You would have kept it buried forever. Gerald's letters, the truth of his voyage, the treasure our father concealed. Did you think I would not return for what is rightfully mine?" Armitage snarled, attempting to shake free from the constable's grip. "Silence, fool. You have said too much." But Holmes's hand upon his shoulder held him fast. "You speak of treasure," Holmes said smoothly, ignoring Armitage's struggles. "That, then, is the heart of the phantom tale. Not ghosts, but gold. Lord Mulgrave's vault hides more than dust, and your antiquarian friend here has taken your desperation as the lever for his schemes." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "You cannot prove it. The letters are ours. Gerald wrote of a chest taken from the Hesperus, a relic from the Indies. Father swore to keep it safe until his children could claim it. Lydia would not believe, but I—" Holmes cut her short with a raised hand. "Belief is not proof, madam. Yet the evidence of this passage, these tools, and your presence here at midnight, is proof enough of conspiracy." He turned to Lestrade. "The inspector will know how to lodge Mr. Armitage. The lady must be treated with care until we determine her precise share in the business." Lestrade, grim but triumphant, signaled to his men. Armitage was bound, still muttering threats in his guttural accent. Eleanor sank against the wall, her defiance faltering now that her accomplice was taken. Miss Lydia, silent and wan, stood like a statue, her eyes never leaving her sister. Holmes, meanwhile, stooped to the bricks that had already been loosened. With deft fingers he drew one aside, revealing the dark cavity beyond. From within came the faint glint of metal. He reached in and drew forth a small casket, heavy and bound with tarnished brass. Dust clung to it, but the design was unmistakably foreign. Ornate carvings of palms and serpents, the work of Eastern craftsmen. "There lies the object of our midnight labors," Holmes said softly. "Whether its contents are jewels or papers, I cannot yet say. But mark how greed and secrecy have woven a phantom more potent than any specter of the grave." He placed the casket into Lestrade's keeping and straightened, brushing the dust from his coat. "Our task is not yet finished. We must trace the chain of these letters, discover how Armitage came to know of them, and whether Eleanor is more pawn than partner. The phantom at Blackwood Cemetery is unmasked, but the shadow it casts is not wholly dispelled." We made our way back toward the steps, our captives guarded, the casket borne between two constables. As we emerged into the wan daylight, the fog lifting slowly from the graves, I felt the chill of the vault cling still about me. Holmes alone seemed untouched, his face alight with the fire of the chase, his eyes fixed already upon the next move in the intricate game. Back in the daylight, the cemetery seemed less oppressive, though the strange affair pressed heavily on all our minds. The constables marched Armitage ahead, his wrists bound, while Eleanor followed under Lestrade's watchful eye. Miss Lydia walked beside me, silent save for the sound of her skirts brushing the damp grass. Holmes lingered somewhat apart, his keen eyes darting between our captives, the casket borne by two men, and the path that wound through the graves toward the gate. He was as a chess player, whose mind already plots 3 moves in advance, restless though outwardly composed. At the gate a small crowd had gathered, drawn by rumor of disturbance. Lestrade barked at them to disperse, but whispers trailed behind us as we proceeded toward Miss Mulgrave's house, where Holmes declared the matter must be further examined in private. Once inside, the constables set the casket upon a table in the sitting room, its brass fittings tarnished but intact. The sisters sat opposite one another, Lydia pale and motionless, Eleanor sullen and tight-lipped. Armitage, grim and silent now, leaned against the mantelpiece under guard, his eyes fixed with a calculating gleam upon the box. Holmes regarded the group a moment before addressing Lestrade. "Inspector, before you take these persons to the yard, allow me to satisfy a small curiosity. We are in the presence of an object for which a man has murdered and a woman has risked her honor. It would be useful to see whether the chest contains that which justifies so much peril." Lestrade hesitated, then nodded curtly. "So long as it is done here and under my eye, break it open." Holmes produced a slender tool from his pocket and deftly worked at the corroded clasp. It yielded with a snap, and the lid creaked open. All leaned forward, breath held. Within lay a bundle of papers, their edges browned, with age bound by a faded ribbon. Beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small quantity of coins. Spanish doubloons by the look of them, their gold dull yet heavy. A faint metallic scent mingled with the odor of mildew. Eleanor gave a strangled cry. Gerald's letters. She half rose, but Lestrade's hand upon her shoulder thrust her back. Lydia, by contrast, closed her eyes as though in prayer. Holmes lifted the bundle and untied the ribbon with delicate care. He unfolded the first sheet, its ink faded but still legible. His brow furrowed as he read, his lips moving silently. At length he replaced it, rifled through the rest, and then looked up. "These are indeed letters from Gerald Mulgrave," he said, "written during his voyage upon the Hesperus. They speak of a chest of relics taken from a Portuguese trader, and of his father's promise to guard them until the family could decide their disposition. Yet, observe, Watson, the vagueness of his words. Nowhere does he name jewels or treasure. He speaks rather of a legacy, of knowledge bought with blood. The coins are few and likely were meant as tokens. The real prize lies in the information these letters conceal." Armitage sneered. "A clever speech, Mr. Holmes, but words alone will not fill a purse. I care not for letters. Gold is gold, whether minted in Lisbon or London." "Indeed," Holmes replied coolly. "Yet you killed a man for so little." "No, Armitage. You are no common thief. You knew there was more. Something these letters hint at but do not reveal. Perhaps a chart, perhaps a cipher. Without it, the casket is of little use to you. Hence your alliance with Miss Eleanor, who believed she could supply what the letters lacked." Eleanor's composure wavered. "I never sought Jacob's death. I only wished for what was promised us." Gerald's words were clear. Father kept the secret in his vault, and Lydia would not tell me. Armitage said he could help. "Help himself, rather," Holmes said dryly. "He saw in your desperation an instrument for his ambition. But mark you, madam, desperation does not excuse conspiracy." He turned sharply on Armitage. "Your accent betrays you, sir. Those guttural syllables were German, were they not? I suspect your name is not Armitage, but Armin Keller, late of Bremen, who fled the continent under suspicion of smuggling antiquities." The man's face darkened, though he made no reply. Lestrade's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "That will serve us well enough. You will find our cells less hospitable than your tunnels, Keller." Holmes waved a hand impatiently. "We shall let the law do its part. But the greater puzzle remains unsolved. Gerald Mulgrave's letters conceal a riddle, and unless we read it aright, others will rise to continue the search. Watson, note the repeated references to latitude and storms, couched in metaphors of faith. They are more than the musings of a sailor. They point to a location, possibly the resting place of whatever relics the Hesperus carried before its wreck." He gathered the papers once more, tying the ribbon with a decisive motion. "These must be studied in private. Inspector, if you will escort Mr. Keller to the yard and place Miss Eleanor under suitable care, I shall remain here with Miss Lydia to pursue the thread. We may yet discover why men whisper of phantoms in Blackwood Cemetery, when the true specters are greed and secrecy." Lestrade agreed, though reluctantly, and soon the house was quieter. The constables marched the prisoners away, their boots echoing upon the stones, while Holmes and I remained with Lydia. She sat motionless by the fire, her hands folded tightly. Holmes laid the letters upon the bureau and spread them with precise care, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You see, Watson," he murmured, "the phantom was but the curtain. Now we begin the play itself. And I fancy the drama will not end in Hampstead, but far beyond, where Gerald Mulgrave's voyage first began." Holmes waited until the last echo of the constables had died, drew the curtains against the gray morning, and mended the fire until it burned steady. He arranged Gerald Mulgrave's letters on the bureau and weighed the corners with the paper knife and the small box of doubloons. Miss Lydia, composed by effort, stood near, her gaze upon her brother's hand. "Let us read with a sailor's eye," Holmes said. "A landsman sees piety. A seaman hides mathematics in weather." He passed me 3 sheets and kept the rest. The cemetery lantern, set on the table to dry, smoked faintly. The script was neat and close, filled with devout phrases that, at a glance, were the commonplaces of a seaman of faith. Holmes touched a line. "Here. When the 7th psalm was sung under a sky of iron, I kept north by a hair's breadth, and the bell struck twice and once again before the storm relented." "What say you, Watson?" "That he stood his watch in grim conditions," I answered. True, yet the numbers are exact. Again, on the day of St. Bartholomew, I found my compass no friend. But the stars were kinder. 3 bright ones led me to cast the lot again. Read his diary, mist. Read his chart, landfall. He gives bearings by psalm and saint and keeps time by bells. He indicated tiny initials, B, M, and once a faint L. Bartholomew, Michaelmas, perhaps latitude. Repetition leaves pegs for the cipher. He crossed to Gerald's portrait, lifted it down, and loosened the back with a screwdriver. A slip of vellum, folded thin as a card, fell from the rebate. Lydia stifled a cry. Holmes unfolded it. The surface was pricked with minute points, and a cramped legend read, Psalm, Watch, Saint. A narrow ruled line along the top bore degrees. A star map married to a psalter, he murmured. Your brother gave your father the key and hid it where a dutiful parent would keep his likeness. The bells tell the watch, the psalms, the stars by number, the saints the season. From these, a course. He set the vellum beside the letters. Now we test it. Watson, the small almanac. I fetched it. St. Bartholomew, 24th August. In that season 3 bright stars rule the evening. Vega, Altair, Deneb. 3 bright ones led me. Fix their altitudes at the bell strikes. Correct the northing by a hair's breadth. A degree, no more. His pencil flicked. The straight edge whispered. 3 intersections yielded a line, angling southwest from the Bay of Biscay toward a lonely sea. Not toward land, I said, but toward a wreck. Just so. The Hesperus lies off Madeira, as rumor and Miss Mulgrave agree. Yet, knowledge bought with blood is strange coin for bullion. He protects proof, not treasure. Some log or affidavit to blast a reputation ashore. He looked to Lydia. Did your father fear any man? She nodded. He quarreled with Mr. Peregrine Vale, a shipbroker. They parted bitterly. Mr. Vale accused Gerald of unlawful prize-taking and vowed to ruin us if evidence should appear. Holmes's eyes keenened. The motive sharpens. Keller, calling himself Armitage, trawled for relics and found a lady who believed in a chest. Vale would value documents. 2 nets for 1 shoal. He pulled the bell. Sarah, the maid entered. Has Mr. Vale called or sent a messenger? Twice, sir, she said. A clerk with narrow eyes, Mr. Kemp, asked if letters had come from abroad and whether the family vault was under repair. Holmes exchanged a look with me. Keller wades in the channel while Kemp fishes from the bank. He folded the vellum. These must be copied. Watson, your notebook. I transcribed the essential lines while he pricked the star points into a duplicate. He returned the originals to the bureau, locked the drawer with Lydia's key, and slipped our copies into his pocketbook. We go to Baker Street, he said. An hour with the Admiralty chart will refine our course, and a wire to Lestrade shall keep Keller close and silent. Miss Mulgrave, send to the parish that the vault be watched discreetly. No rumor must reach the press. If Mr. Vale or his Kemp calls, you are indisposed. Admit none. And my sister? Lydia asked. She is safer under the inspector than among those who used her, Holmes replied. We set out. The rain had thinned to a mist. At the gate a hackney drew up, and a square man in sober black stepped out, florid, with a practiced smile. Miss Mulgrave? Peregrine Vale? I came the moment I heard of the scandal. Might a friend advise? Holmes's hand touched my sleeve. Another time, Mr. Vale. Miss Mulgrave is indisposed. Vale's smile broadened. Certain documents of your late brother's concern parties beyond this family. Prudence would place them in hands that understand their weight. Hands like Mr. Kemp's? Holmes asked. The smile stiffened. My clerk is diligent. Good day." He withdrew, but his glance raked the house. Holmes watched him go. "The tide turns, Watson," he said. "All currents set toward one reef, to Baker Street. Then we cast our net where the shoal must pass now." We found Baker Street under a pale noon. Mrs. Hudson took our wet coats, while Holmes unrolled an Admiralty chart and weighted its corners with jars. Our duplicate vellum lay beside the compass rose. Holmes's pencil hovered, then moved with a surgeon's certainty. "Mark the run from Biscay," he said. "Gerald's Sky of Iron is a northerly. The bells, 2 and 1, finish the first dog watch. St. Bartholomew fixes late August. If Vega stands thus at that hour, our latitude shifts by his hairbreadth." His line crept across the blue. "Not Madeira, Watson, but a shoal northeast of Porto Santo, ill-favored by pilots." He sent me for Captain Greaves's pamphlet, Obscure Hazards of the Eastern Atlantic. Holmes tapped a passage. "A low rise, awash in equinoctial gales. The sea opens like a door and shows sand, then shuts with spume." He looked up briefly. Gerald's phrase, "door in the sea." He cached something at ebb and counted on storms. "And the something?" I asked. "A logbook, a sworn deposition, perhaps the Portuguese traders' papers. If Vale trafficked in an unlawful prize, a single authenticated manifest would ruin him. Keller sells relics. Vale buys silence. Miss Eleanor was the rope." He dashed off 2 telegrams, one to a tugmaster at the West India docks to stand ready, the second to Lestrade, "Hold Keller. Question Kemp of Peregrine Vale. Watch him. Report." The boy sped out, and Holmes stood with hands behind him, as if listening to lines drawn upon water. Lestrade arrived within the hour, hat sprinkled with drizzle. "Keller will not talk. The woman is contrite and obstinate. Kemp has left Vale's office, so says the porter, carrying a flat parcel in oilskin." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "The fish is on the move. Took a cab?" "A hansom toward Euston Road. Then the river. He wants a waterman and a mouth shut with coin." Holmes opened his violin case and extracted a Webley and a coil of line. "We shall lift him at the waterline." 2 cabs bore us to the docks. The air smelt of tar. Gulls scissored the wind. Winches throbbed. Holmes steered by instinct. "Kemp will choose Pike," he said, "a man who trusts shillings more than the commandments." A lean fellow with a cod's face slouched from behind a shed, oilskin parcel under his arm, and angled toward a skiff where a second man waited with oars. Lestrade's constable gave a premature shout. The fellow wheeled and ran. The boatman cast off. The skiff bumped off. Kemp, if it was he, leapt, misjudged, and struck the timber with a cry. The parcel flew, skittered beneath a stack of tarred rope, and stuck there. Holmes reached it in 3 bounds, dropped to a knee, and drew out the oilskin. Lestrade had Kemp by the collar. Holmes slit the wrapping. Within lay a ledger bound in salt-stained calf, edges swollen by damp. On the flyleaf, a firm hand. "Journal of the Nossa Senhora do Carmo, Captain Teixeira," and below, "Attested at Funchal by Gerald Mulgrave." Holmes gave a short sound. "The heart of it, Watson. Vale would give his teeth to keep this from daylight." Kemp spat. "You have no right." Lestrade shook him. "We have the Queen's." Holmes had turned to the river, where the flood pushed patches of foam like torn letters. "This is a copy carried ashore," he said. "The corroboration that nails Vale lies at that door which opens and shuts. He will not sleep while it remains, nor shall I. We sail at dusk." "In this weather?" I protested, for sleet had begun to needle the water. "Exactly in this weather. A man who fears witnesses prefers a storm. The tug will take us downriver, A cutter will meet us off Gravesend. We must be over the shoal at low tide tomorrow." He tucked the ledger inside his coat and sent a final wire. When he returned, his manner had the quiet of a set trap. "The tug Bellona stands ready. I have telegraphed Miss Mulgrave to admit no one and to place Gerald's letters in the vicar's custody. Lestrade will keep Keller and Kemp apart. Vale will believe his fishermen still at large." We boarded the Bellona as dusk thickened. Her deck smelt of coal and salt. The master, a square Cornishman with pebble-blue eyes, touched his cap. "Weather's dirty, sir." "Dirty is clean for our purpose," Holmes replied. "Hold her for the Lower Hope. A cutter named Linnet will show a lantern thrice." We nosed into the Thames, past masts and the wharves. Snow mingled with rain, then slackened to a raw mist that turned the banks to shadow. Holmes stood at the taffrail, collar up. Presently, a pinprick winked ahead. 1, 2, 3. The Linnet slid from the gray like a bird, took us aboard, and bore away to sea. Below in the cabin, Holmes spread the chart. "Low water off the shoal at 6, he said. "We anchor in its lee and wait for the sea to open its door. Sleep if you can, Watson. I shall keep the first watch with the stars and Gerald Mulgrave for company." I slept little, jarred by the cutter's motion, and woke to a cold gray pressing at the panes. Holmes had not lain down. Cloak about him, he watched the light. The master spoke. The anchor splashed. We swung to our cable in the ebb. "In 2 hours the shoal will lift its lips," Holmes said, consulting his watch. Then the door opens. "Are we alone?" I asked. "No." A beamy yawl watched off our quarter. "Vale's men. They hope we will show them." Holmes spread our copy of the vellum and traced bearings. A watch by bells, a door by ebb. Quick to open, quiet to shut. The sea fell. A patch ahead showed sand. A long ridge rose, then settled. The master whistled. "There she is." We lowered a boat. Holmes, the master, and I went. 2 hands bent to the oars. The keel grated. We stepped into surf that pulled at our boots. The air smelt of kelp. Holmes led along the spine of the rise, eyes searching for a sign. He halted where coral fragments rimmed a depression. Gerald would choose a mark a gale might shred, yet his own eye would hold. "See, the stones are set at right angles, and here a stake hole." He swept aside sand and laid bare the rusted eye of an iron ring. We cleared sand. The ring stirred. A rotted cord parted in his fingers. He levered up a small trap of planking, revealing a cavity shored with driftwood. Within lay a tin cylinder sealed with pitch and bound with wire. Holmes lifted it quickly. The master gave a word of praise for such sailors' cunning. The cylinder glittered. Pitch beaded black. We had no time to gloat. The yawl slipped nearer. A man in her bow held a boat hook. Another steadied a pistol. Vale crouched by the tiller, face strained. Holmes called out, "You come late, Mr. Vale. The tide will not mend your reputation." "Give me the cylinder," he called, "and no harm." The pistol cracked. Spray leapt. Holmes thrust the cylinder into my arms and whispered, "Down." He raised empty hands and walked forward into the wash. "You have mistaken your ground. Salvage does not extend to stolen papers, nor bribes to murder. Lower it." The yawl bore closer, her keel beginning to complain upon the shoal. The man fired again. At that instant the sea sucked back as if a plug were drawn. Sand flashed bare. The yawl grounded with a jar. Her stern slewed. The bowman toppled into the shallows with a cry. "Now," Holmes shouted. The hands ran the skiff into deeper water and pulled. I stumbled after, clutching the tube. Vale sprang overboard, but his boots sucked at the sand. He floundered, roaring orders to no tide. We scrambled in, backs to it, and bent to the oars. A spent bullet struck the gunwale and skipped away. The cutter loomed, rope ready. We pitched the cylinder aboard and followed while the sea covered the reef again. Holmes had the tube in the cabin. With the master and me as witnesses, he scored the pitch, unwound the wire, and drew out oilskin packets and a small wooden case. He broke the seal with care. Inside lay an affidavit signed by Gerald and a Portuguese captain, witnessed at Funchal, a manifest, a chart with the trader's course and a red cross, and a brief letter to Lord Mulgrave. I keep these where the sea opens and shuts. Holmes's jaw set. Vale is finished, the master grunted. And we? Merely the postmen of justice, Holmes said, rewrapping the proofs. Make headway. The yawl will float with the next lift. I prefer to meet Mr. Vale where policemen stand steady and cartridges are few. By Gravesend, the wind fell to drizzle. A police launch met us, Lestrade upright with papers. His eyes brightened at the cylinder. Holmes passed it across without flourish. Your net is full, he said. Draw gently. Vale was taken off the shoal by a fisherman who dislikes unpaid fares. Lestrade replied. Kemp sits in a cell and promises talk if he may keep his skin. Then you shall have chorus enough, Holmes said. See that Eleanor Mulgrave is spared the worst lamps. She was a tool, not a hand. And Keller? I asked. In irons, said Lestrade. He seeks counsel. He will find truth the harder counsel, Holmes murmured. Come, Watson. The parish vault and Miss Lydia still wait. The launch towed us up. London rose. I looked at Holmes, whose face, though drained by vigil, wore that serenity which follows a knot untied. He met my glance with a flicker of amusement and drew his cloak close. Watson, he said, the sea hides what men most fear to show. We will put our proofs before a magistrate. After that, Blackwood Cemetery must have its phantom laid to rest. The return to London brought little respite. For though Vale's yawl lay crippled on the shoal and his men scattered by tide and constable alike, the matter required a final knot to be tied before the courts, and the public could call it settled. Holmes, with his customary disdain for triumph, carried the tin cylinder under his arm as though it were a mere bundle of documents from some minor brief, and insisted that we proceed not first to Baker Street, but to the yard. Lestrade received us with a look of mingled fatigue and relief, for he had ridden through the night with reports streaming in from every constable posted about Vale's haunts. The affidavit, the manifest, and the chart were examined by candlelight in the superintendent's office. Lestrade, though no scholar of maritime law, grasped enough to see the ruin they spelled for Vale. Forgery is impossible, Holmes remarked. The ink, the witness marks, the water stains, all agree with Gerald Mulgrave's letters and the Portuguese captain's hand. Vale cannot explain these away, nor will Keller's silence help him. Lestrade slapped the desk with satisfaction. It is a rare day, Mr. Holmes, when a phantom yields such solid profit. Vale in the dock, Keller and Kemp to follow. Why, the press will call it the unmasking of the century. Holmes's lip curled faintly. Pray let them. Only be sure the Mulgrave name is spared needless scandal. Miss Eleanor is guilty of folly and weakness, not of blood. Her sister must not be dragged down with her. I could see in his eyes, as he said it, that he meant to call upon Lydia once more before the affair was put entirely into the hands of magistrates. Indeed, after we had signed the necessary depositions and secured the cylinder under lock, Holmes turned to me with a nod. Come, Watson. We have one duty left in Hampstead, for a ghost cannot be exorcised by documents alone. That afternoon we found Miss Lydia seated by the fire, her expression calm though pale. The maid had already brought her the news of Vale's arrest, and she received Holmes with a quiet gratitude that spoke more than words. "You have done for my family what I feared no power could do," she said. Yet still the villagers whisper of lights in the vault, of Jacob's shade wandering the yews. Holmes inclined his head. "Superstition outlives fact by many a season, Miss Mulgrave. It must be ended by a public act. Permit the vault to be opened, the lamp removed, the passage sealed. Then the phantom will have no stage." She agreed, though reluctantly. And so, 2 days later, we stood once more in Blackwood Cemetery. A small gathering of parish officers and workmen attended, along with the vicar who spoke a prayer over Jacob Snipe's grave. The slab of the Mulgrave mausoleum was drawn aside in daylight, the hidden stair exposed, and under Holmes's direction, the workmen bricked the passage with fresh mortar, sealing it forever from prying hands. The sooty lamp, the wax stubs, and the tools were carried out and burned before the assembled witnesses. When the last brick was set and the slab rolled shut, a sigh seemed to pass among those present, as though some invisible burden had been lifted from the place. Holmes stood a while in silence, his gaze upon the yew where Jacob had fallen. "Thus ends your phantom, Watson," he said at last. "Not by exorcism, but by evidence, not by spells, but by spade and mortar. A trick of light, a draught of air, a murdered servant, all marshaled by greed. Yet to the simple eye of the village, it was ghost enough." Miss Lydia, standing nearby, spoke softly. "I thank you, Mr. Holmes, not only for my father's honor, but for the peace of our ground. My sister, may she find mercy. And for myself, I shall see that Jacob's widow wants for nothing." Her dignity moved me deeply, and even Holmes bowed gravely. We left her there, calm beneath the sighing branches, and returned to the cab that awaited us. Back in Baker Street that evening, as the fog crept once more along the gutters and the fire glowed in its familiar grate, I found Holmes in one of his rare moods of reflection. He sat with the affidavit open upon his knees, his violin resting unplayed beside him. "There is a pattern, Watson," he said, "in all human deception. The phantom of Blackwood was but another mask for avarice. Yet the mask is instructive, for it shows how the human mind will rather conjure spirits than admit simple villainy. It is a weakness I shall not cease to study." I remarked that the case had been singular in its mixture of superstition and fact, of family honor and international intrigue. He smiled faintly, dismissing praise. "You, my dear Watson, see romance. I see only the inevitable consequence of a careless candle, a sister's ambition, and a broker's fear. But the world thrives on romance, and perhaps you are right to write it so." Thus ended the matter of the phantom at Blackwood Cemetery, not with the clash of sabers or the unmasking of some spectral figure, but with a casket of damp letters, a shoal where the sea opens and shuts, and a family restored to peace. And if even now the villagers whisper of strange lights behind the yew, I can at least affirm that the only flame that burned in that place was the small, steady lamp of reason, held aloft by Sherlock Holmes. Holmes remained in his chair long after the lamps had been lowered, his gaze fixed not upon the fire, but upon some inward diagram known only to himself. At length he stirred, took up his violin, and drew from it a soft chord that hung in the air, like the fading echo of the case itself. "You perceive, Watson," he said, "that in this business every element pointed not to specters, but to men. The light in the vault, the draught through the aperture, the soot upon Jacob's sleeve, these were no miracles but trifles waiting to be read. Trifles, you know, are my trait. I could not but agree, though I remarked that the peril had seemed real enough when Vale's pistol cracked across the shoal. He gave a thin smile. Peril is the common currency of villainy. Vale played his hand boldly, but without imagination. He feared discovery more than the sea, and in fearing it, he hastened his own ruin. Keller sought profit, Kemp obedience, Eleanor escape. Each was tethered to the same anchor, and it dragged them all down together. I pressed him then on Lydia, who had borne so much with such composure. Holmes's expression softened, though only briefly. She is of a rarer kind, Watson. Strong in silence, loyal to her father's memory, unwilling to barter her name for gold. She will suffer from the scandal, but less than if the truth had remained buried. The law will deal lightly with Eleanor, and Lydia will stand the straighter for it. One cannot choose one's kin, but one may choose one's honor. He laid aside the violin and turned the manifest over in his hands. As for Gerald, his letters were never meant to rouse treasure hunters. They were a ciphered confession, a sailor's attempt to safeguard truth. He could not face Peregrine Vale directly, so he left the evidence in the only strongbox he trusted, the sea. In that sense, Watson, Gerald's phantom was real enough, the ghost of a duty unfulfilled, haunting the living until justice was done. The fire sank lower. Outside, the muffled wheels of a late hansom rattled down Baker Street. Holmes rose, threw his cloak about him, and gazed into the mist as if already seeking the next problem to stir his restless mind. This case, he said, was never about a cemetery or a phantom. It was about the lengths to which men will go to conceal their guilt and the shadows they cast to frighten others from the truth. Strip away the shadow, and you will always find a hand holding the lantern. I took up my pen, knowing that another chapter of our strange adventures was closing. As always, Holmes dismissed his own triumphs as inevitable. Yet I knew well that without his piercing logic, the phantom of Blackwood might still be whispered of in taverns and alleys, a terror to children and a blot upon a family's peace. Instead, it was laid to rest with the dead, and justice stood firm once more. Thus concluded the affair of Sherlock Holmes and the phantom at Blackwood Cemetery, an affair in which superstition yielded to reason, deceit to truth, and the dark vaults of the graveyard gave up not spirits, but secrets. And as Holmes bent once more to his violin, the solemn notes rose through the fog, a requiem not only for Jacob Snipe and Gerald Mulgrave, but for every phantom that men conjure when they fear the simple clarity of fact.